Is anybody out there? Anybody?
We are College Hill Farm. Welcome back to College Hill Farm. Well, today we're continuing our series on casual and complementary prepping, and we're starting to look at why you should prep. We're going to tell you about why we prep and why you should prep. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about a few misconceptions about preppers. What TV shows you is not what it actually is like. For example, not every prepper out there has a bunker. Alright? Not everyone is afraid of everything. First off, the media wants to play preppers as being crazy. That's not at all what we consider a prepper to be. What we're looking at when we talk about prepping, we're talking about a person who looks at things down the road and decides, hey, this is how I'm going to do this if something happens. So prepping is not what you think. Prepping's more of a lifestyle. It's an Appalachian self-sustainability type lifestyle, okay? Now, the media would have you think that it's something else, but it's not. You would never know your average prepper to meet them on the street. All right? They're just regular, ordinary people. The next misconception is preppers are gun nuts. Preppers almost all have guns. I'm just going to say that out. But, you know, I don't know of an Appalachian that doesn't have a gun. All right? Very few people who live an Appalachian lifestyle, like Crystal and I, don't have a gun. So prepping is not that much different from everybody else. Preppers are paranoid is the next one. Well, you know, if you're preparing for natural disasters and things like that, are you paranoid? That makes you a prepper. Now, the type of prepping that Crystal and I do, I consider casual prepping or complementary prepping. It's all part of the lifestyle that we lead. Living an Appalachian lifestyle. My grandmother and grandfather lived through the Great Depression. And they didn't live through the Great Depression by sitting on their laurels and waiting for things to come to them. They were proactive. They saved their own food. They put it up. They canned. They raised animals. They hunted. They fished. So they were living an Appalachian lifestyle. And here are the reasons why you should too. Living in Appalachia, my father was a coal miner. His father was a coal miner. Okay, his father was a farmer because coal mining really didn't come to Appalachia as a big deal until early in the 1900s. So before coal mining started in Appalachia, they were farmers. Okay, they were living hard scrabble farm lifestyle, but my grandfather, Dad's father and mother, they lived through the Great Depression. Mom's mother lived through it too, and they did something because of the nature of mining. Mining is an extraction industry. When coal prices are high, there's plenty of work. When coal prices are low, there's no work. Okay, so they had to be prepared for those lulls. So they raised big gardens. They saved back money from when they were working to be prepared to handle a 6-month or even a year shutdown at the local mine. All right, so they had to be proactive through that. And I was raised in that lifestyle. Dad was a miner, so we worked the same way. So it was living an Appalachian lifestyle. But the things that you should be prepared for, loss of income, okay, whether you get laid off or whatever, pension loss. If you draw a little pension, what if something happened like in Detroit and your pension got cut from $3,000 a month to $300 a month? What are you going to do? You need to be prepared for that kind of thing. What if you're working and you mess up a shoulder but you didn't mess it up at work, so you can't draw workers' comp. Are you prepared for the 6 to 8 weeks it's going to be off for the shoulder surgery and the physical therapy? Okay, that's just, I had to have a shot in my hip and my knee here in this year because I got to where I couldn't hardly walk. Well, are you prepared to deal with those kinds of things? An eviction. Now, in the time of COVID, evictions are going to happen. And then homelessness. How are you going to prepare for that? Now, Crystal and I prepared for that one by paying off our home. We took out a mortgage initially when we bought our homestead. But when we sold our other house, we paid our homestead off. We thought about building a single floor ensuite with a master bath and a master bedroom. Well, we would have had to have kept our mortgage in order to have done that. But rather than do that, we decided to pay our mortgage off so our home is paid for. And we don't have to worry about nobody coming and taking our home. Unless Imminent Domain gets in the way. So, those are the things you need to look at how your income is going to be affected by in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And plan for that. The next prepper activity is looking at your utilities. Now, some preppers are off-grid. Well, off-grid's fine. And I could go through do a whole segment on pointing out how off-grid doesn't necessarily mean independent. But I'm not going to do that. Everybody needs to prep. I'm not going to make disparaging comments about anybody prepping the way they prep, okay? Because everybody's got to do it their own way and do the best they can. But one of the things we have to prep for is utility outages. Water. If you don't have water coming to your property, it's nice to turn on the tap. But what about if you folks with wells? Well, you got a well, but if there's no pump to pump the water out, you don't have no water. So you have to think about those things. Electricity. Electricity is another big one. We've all got used to our heat pumps and our air conditioners and our washers and dryers. It's hard to do without that electricity. Have you got a plan how to handle those kinds of things if your electricity is off for, say, an extended period of time? Now, when I was a kid, we had a ice storm, and certain parts of our county didn't have electricity for almost 30 days. That's a big deal, a super big deal. So, power outages, sewer. If your water goes off, maybe your sewer's not pumping either. Okay, now we have a septic tank, so that's not a big deal for us, but eventually that septic tank will have to be pumped. Gas, natural gas, or propane. It may get to where you might have propane as a backup heat and you can't get any. Okay, that might be another big deal, something that you need to consider when you're prepping. The next thing when you talk about prepping is some of the other things that you need to prep for. Well, Mother Nature has her own idea about what this country is about. It has its own idea about what you need to prep for. For example, floods, droughts, winter storms. A winter storm can knock out your electric for days. We lost it for a month. In '93 there was a blizzard, and we never lost power. But just 5 houses down from us didn't have power for like 7 days. So, yeah, it can happen. Tornadoes, hurricanes, mudslides. If you're a homesteader, too much rain. Or not enough rain. Okay? Volcanoes, mass migrations. If something's going on in a part of the country, your country, or the next country over, really. If something's going on major in that country, there's going to be a migration of people. All right, people migrate. When resources get finite, people migrate. We've seen it all through history. All right, the people of the sea and people coming from China into India, and the migrations, they happen. Okay, that's the way humans populated the world. Migration. So you have to be prepared for that kind of thing. And one of the next things is wildfires. Here in eastern Kentucky, wildfires are fairly common, and they're more common now than they were just a few years ago. So, and we're seeing that on a large scale all around the globe. So you might need to think about planning for those. All of those things are things that you need to think about as a prepper. Then there are the man-made stupids. Okay? They happen all the time. There is a war going on somewhere on the globe every day. Okay? It happens every day, even in countries that we would consider to be stable. It happens. So that's a thing that you might have to deal with. Nuclear accidents. Those happen too. Coal sludge impoundments that break loose. Those happen and kill people. All right? Chemical accidents. We live by the Richmond DRMO, or the depot it's called, and they're destroying all the chemical weapons that are held by the U.S. So, wow, we're close to a major thing. Nuclear war could happen. All right, we were closer to it than we were closer to it in the past than we are right now, but it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. Some small country could decide that they can do a limited nuclear strike and be successful. Well, limited nuclear strikes generally turn into big nuclear strikes. But now that's just a subject for a whole nother video, and we'll talk about that. I'm a physicist, and I'm just going to tell you, you don't want to live through a nuclear war. It's just, you don't want to. I just soon they hit me right on the head. So let's move on. Then there's the disaster that the man-made disaster that you just never would have thought of. Something called imminent domain. Now, if your community decides that there's something that might be good for the community and it needs to occur on your property, they can take your property. Now, I know you don't think about that, but when I was, before we left Harlan County, they had a flood control project. And the flood control project came through and it raised people's houses so that they wouldn't be in the flood, or it bought them out. Okay? And that all sounds wonderful and good, but there were some houses that were, say, the valuation of the house might have been only $18,000 or $20,000. All right? They were just little camp houses. That's what we called them. They were built by a coal mine back sometime for people to live in, and people had bought them and fixed them up a little bit, but they still were not highly valuable. So they would be, maybe $18,000 would be all they were worth. Well, if you were in the flood project, some houses could be raised, and some houses where they could only be bought out. That was the only option. And some was mandatory to be bought out, and some was optional. Okay, you could opt. So, in some of those situations, people found themselves in a place where they could only sell out. Well, if you've got a house that's worth $18,000, but it's paid for, and you don't have to pay rent, and your income is such that you can't afford to pay rent, that $18,000 will not buy you a new place. So there you are. And it was done by something called Imminent Domain. What's good for the community? Well, it was good for the community that people weren't in the floodplain. So that happened. You know, some people had to sell out, but they couldn't afford to buy back. And so it was a tough time for some folks. Some folks came out real well with it. You know, they got a better house than they had before because they were fairly generous with some of the property values. But it doesn't always happen that way. So be prepared for eminent domain and that kind of thing. When you select a piece of property or whatever, look at all those possibilities. Okay, we've talked about most of the others, but there are some things that are going to happen that are well out of your control. Medical emergencies are going to happen. Okay, you have to prepare for the non-medical emergencies too. But let's talk about the medical emergencies. Well, the medical emergencies might be something like a heart attack or a stroke or cuts, something simple as cuts and burns, broken bones, first aid, sprains, injuries. You need to be prepared to deal with what you have. So taking a first aid class never hurt nobody. They're short. They're under 25 hours worth of work time, and they're well worth their, the American Red Cross first aid class is well worth generally about $20, $25 that you have to pay for it. And getting a first aid kit and that kind of thing, everybody ought to have one, whether you're prepping or not. It might save you a finger, or it might save you a hand or a leg. That's just one of those things that preppers need to be concerned about, the medical stuff and your medicine. Don't forget about your medicine. If you're like me and Crystal, we take medicine. So we need to try and have a supply saved up to last us for 2 or 3 months. Most emergencies are going to go by in 2 or 3 months. A total collapse of society is not likely to happen unless there's just a super natural disaster event, something like a comet strike or a large meteor strike or a super volcano or something like that, or a winter caused by a volcano. Even during the Black Death, when 3/4 of the population died off, it didn't destroy the hierarchical pattern of government. So you need to look at that and understand that these things will come back. They just may come back a little bit different. Now, there can be a benefit to you to prep. For example, preppers tend to buy things in quantity, and I'm going to tell you right up front, right up front, when you buy stuff to prep with, only buy stuff that you'll eat, or you need for home defense, or don't buy a whole bunch of extraneous stuff. Things are cheaper to buy in quantities. It's a lot cheaper to buy a 25-pound bag of rice than it is to buy 1-pound bags. A lot cheaper. And rice is something that you'll use now. If you cook your own meals at home, and that's what I'm going to recommend, you get used to cooking your own meals at home. It's so much cheaper than going out and buying. Get used to cooking your own meals at home. The stuff that you grow yourself is a lot better quality than what you're going to buy. We live on this homestead, and we grow, last year I think 426,000 calories worth of food came out of our garden. Now, that's not enough to last for an entire year, but pretty much all the vegetables that Crystal and I eat came out of our garden. So we don't buy vegetables much. I think we bought some spinach this year and some the little cabbage heads, Brussels sprouts. We brought some Brussels sprouts. We love those things. And we buy peas by the case. The little canned peas, the early June peas, because I just hate growing them. And if it come down to it in a situation, I wouldn't have to have them no way. So that's one of those things that you have to evaluate. But the things you grow yourself are so much better for you. They're better for you. They're better for your health. Getting out and working's better for your health, the whole bit. And I'm just going to tell you, if you wait for an emergency to plan to grow your own food, you're too late. You've waited too long. Okay, so just think about that. Also, if you're one of those preppers, now a lot of folks go out and they buy these 5-gallon buckets of food that's shelf stable for 25 years. Well, if you've ever eaten some of that, I guarantee you won't want to eat much of it. So food that you won't eat is absolutely useless to you in a survival situation. Okay? People in survival situations get under duress, and a lot of times, unless it's food that will be tasty, they don't want to eat, and they won't eat, and it is detrimental to their health. So only buy things that you'll eat and things that you can rotate out. You know, if you buy a 25-pound bag of rice, you keep eating on that as the year goes by. Does that make sense? You know, if you got 50 pounds worth of pinto beans stored up, you eat on those as the year goes by. We eat out of our freezers all winter long. Then when spring comes, it's time to replenish them. Okay? So when you plan for money-saving type things, it's a lot cheaper for us, and we eat a lot better by growing our own food than buying it. If we bought our own food, it would cost us a lot more to have the same amount of food that we have today. Now, the next part, personal and home protection. Now, almost everybody I know has some type of personal or home protection. I know a few people that don't, but most people do. For the most part, you're never going to need it. Okay? For the most part, you're never going to need it. Most of the population of the United States have not experienced a break-in. All right? Doesn't mean you won't, but most of the population hasn't. It's probably about 10% of the population that experiences a break-in in their lifetime. So, you know, protection is what it is. You want to protect yourself from robberies, home invasions, evacuations. You know, if they come and said, okay, everybody in your community has to evacuate, you've got 10 minutes. What are you going to grab? Do you know what you're going to grab? You might want to make a list of what you need to get and have some of it already accumulated in the same place. Car breakdowns. If your car breaks down on you, how are you going to get home? If there's a flood, how are you going to get home? What happens if you're stranded somewhere? You get caught out, you had to go to town for something, and then a tornado comes or a landslide blocks you off from getting home. What are you going to do? You need to have a plan for those kinds of things. Being prepared doesn't mean that you have to be paranoid or crazy. It just means that you need to be prepared. I call it living an Appalachian lifestyle, prepared for pretty much anything. Communications. If your communications are out, do you have more than one type of communication? Luckily, we have cell and landline. Well, yesterday our landline was out all day long, and our internet was out all day long. So today, it's back, but, you know, it could go out any time. So how do you communicate? Well, we have cell phones. That's another type of communications. We have CB out in my wood shop. I've got a CB radio out there. That's another form of communication. Okay, you need to think about how you would communicate in SHTF. I want to do ham, but I just haven't had time to fool with that. That's low on my list right now. Community involvement. Nobody's an island. Okay, your community is going to be important in case of an emergency. Be prepared to work with your community. You can't be a loner and make it. Be prepared to work with your community and be prepared to give a little. Okay? Because there are going to be people out there that can't prepare because of their financial situation or whatever. Be prepared. Now, let's talk about prepping as a practice. When we talk about prepping as a practice or a way of living, you want your preparations to be reliable. Okay, number one, you want them to be reliable. If you can't rely on your preparation, I'm not talking about you have to buy the best. Okay, but you want it to be something that's going to be reliable. For the most part, it's not going to take a whole lot to make yourself reliable for a month. Okay? And everybody can prepare for a month. Fun. If prepping's not fun to do, then you ain't doing it right. I love doing stuff like working with a new generator. Going out and target practice. Working in my garden, putting up stuff. Crystal loves to can. Okay? So it's one of those things, it's a labor of love. Enjoy it. Have fun with it. It needs to be of value. Number 3 is it needs to be of value. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, it needs to be something that's going to protect you down the road. Hopefully, you'll never have to use it. Okay? But if you're living a lifestyle where you're prepared, the things that you put up all have value. Whether it's your canned tomatoes or potatoes or sweet potatoes or beans or, okay, you see what I'm saying? It needs to have value. Something that will be of value to you when there's a problem. It needs to be affordable. Look, you can't go out and spend your mortgage money prepping. You can't. You need to set aside a little bit of money each month to build up until you have a month's worth. In case something happened, you've got a month's worth of whatever it is. Okay? Then you can go 2 months, 3 months. All right? Once you get to 6 months to a year, Crystal and I try and plan for a year. So once we get to a year, we could make it a year. But now 2020 has taught us that this isolation stuff sucks. Okay? But that's a subject for another video. It needs to be comforting. Meaning, you need to be calm about what you got prepped. And know that what you have is all you need. And not have to worry about what's coming down the road. It's comforting to us to know we have a year's worth of food. It's comforting to us to know that if everything went to pot, the kids could all come here and be safe. Does that make sense? It needs to be comforting to you to do the things that you're doing. Now, as a prepper, there are some common things that you should be aware of. Now, they're just commonsensical things that a lot of people just don't think about. We were talking about loss of income. Look, if you looked at all of our politicians, I don't care what party you're from, it doesn't matter to me. But if you look at all of your politicians, they all are working on from an assumption that there's always going to be growth. With limited resources, continual growth is not possible. Let me say that again. With limited resources, continual growth is not possible. So think about that as you prepare. There are things coming down the road, and that's going to be a subject for another video. There are things coming down the road that are going to make it so that it will be obvious that perpetual growth is not possible. The next one, be aware of gradual decline. The Roman Empire started into gradual decline. They were great. They had conquered all the known world pretty much. At the time, all of the Mediterranean area. Well, what happened was they got so big that eventually they started declining. And it was gradual, little things. And as the decline happened, Rome became less and less significant for the rest of the empire. Okay? You can think about it like that. Rome became less and less significant for the rest of the empire. So there was gradual decline in the nation. As nations become debt-ridden, corruption-ridden, things like that, there's a gradual decline that occurs. Be sure to pay attention to the signs of that. That will happen. But that's the subject for another video again. There's a difference between local emergencies, local disasters, and widespread disasters. Kind of know the difference and pay attention to them as they occur. A local disaster can turn into a widespread disaster if the local disaster is severe enough, because it can require so many resources to be pulled from over here to go there that it causes a disaster over here. So pay attention to those kinds of things. Remember, no man is an island. Okay? No man is an island. You're going to need your neighbors. You're going to need your friends. You're going to need your family. Don't think that prepping is an isolated thing. There are so many preppers out there that the media would show you that are not involved in their community. They have bunkers and they want to hide out from the community. They're prepared to shoot at their neighbors over a biscuit. Well, no, you can't be that way and survive. Humans are herd animals. If 2020's taught me anything, it taught me that even I'm a herd animal. Even Crystal's a herd animal, and she's a hermit, okay? Even Crystal's a herd animal. We miss being able to go out to the Chinese restaurant. We miss not being able to interact with friends in our community, okay? We miss being able not to interact much with our kids. So this is, and it's hard. I think it almost to the level of depression. So be certain to understand that you are not an island. You have a community, and you have a responsibility to that community. Just like in a Pride Alliance, there's a responsibility and a hierarchy. You have a responsibility in your community. Use that responsibility wisely. Don't squander it. Now, we're going to continue with this series as we go on, and we're going to talk about some of the larger disasters that might happen, and we're going to talk about their effects and what they might mean to you, and how you can prepare for them a little bit better, and what's your likelihood of needing to prepare for them. Like, everybody doesn't need to prepare for the supervolcano in Montana, or do you? Okay? So we're going to talk about all those kinds of things. What about nuclear war? What about an EMP? We're going to talk about all of those things. And we're going to talk about them in a commonsensical way. In a commonsensical way about how to prepare for them without being all hyped. The media hypes everything. We're not going to do that. We're going to be commonsensical and look at the common sense thing that the average ordinary person can do to prepare for these events. Now, if you like this kind of stuff, this homesteading, do-it-yourself kind of thing, be certain to come on out to the channel and subscribe. We do this homesteading stuff every week, sometimes once, about 5 videos. Just depends on what's going on in the homestead that week. Then if you hit the little bell when you come to the channel, it'll notify you when we upload a video. We upload every Sunday. Now, with that being said, it's time for me to get on to the next thing.